This thing needs its own cart. So let's make one.
So we're going to start by making the base of the frame. The materials I've chosen to use are 1-inch square tubing, 1/16 of an inch thick, 1-inch flat stock, 3/16 of an inch thick, and 16 gauge steel plate, all of which could easily be picked up at your local steel yard. The dimensions I've chosen for this cart are 36 inches long by 14 inches wide. So I cut 2 pieces 36 inches long and 2 pieces 14 inches long. Next, I took my combo square and made a perfect 45-degree angle in each corner of each piece that I have cut, ensuring each end slopes in opposite directions so that the pieces later fit together to form a perfect 90-degree angle. There are several ways to cut this material: grinder, bandsaw, torch, or even a chop saw. I'm using a grinder with a .045 cutting wheel. You can use your combo square to double check that you're at least close to a perfect 45-degree angle. Even with perfect 45s marked out, it's unlikely that your cuts will be completely perfect. But no worries if they're not. You can use a flapper disc, commonly known as a tiger paw, on your grinder to buff your cuts down to where they need to be. To fit it all together, I first shimmed my material to ensure my pieces were level all around. Then I used a couple of heavy-duty magnets and a few C-clamps to hold my 90-degree angles. For squareness, I'm double-checking with my tape measure that I have equal measurements all around and diagonally, and then triple-checking with my square. Don't be afraid to tap things around with a hammer if necessary. Now that I have everything level and square all around, I'm ready to start tacking. I'm just putting a couple of tacks in each corner of my base, and notice how I'm moving to opposite corners. This is to prevent the heat of the weld from pulling and distorting my project. Next, I'll flip it over and follow the same procedure. 2 tacks each corner, moving back and forth to opposite corners. After getting my base all tacked up, I'm ready to weld it out. The process I'm using for this project is FCAW, or Flux Cord Arc Welding, which is similar to the normal MIG process, but it does not require a shielding gas. I'm running Lincoln Electric .030 flux cord wire. Flux cord gets a bad rap a lot of the time, but in reality it is actually a reliable and efficient process. FCAW produces a deep penetrating arc that results in strong and sound welds even after just one pass. As long as you know some basics, flux cord is easy to get the hang of, and I would recommend it to any home DIYer and especially for beginners. A friend of mine actually told me a company in his industry was welding 20-inch pipe using this process, so that definitely says a lot. Actually, he's the same friend who gifted me this really nice Milwaukee grinder. So if you're watching this, you know who you are. Thank you, man. It gets a lot of use around here. Since I need my base to be flush, I'm going to buff down my welds with my tiger paw grinding wheel. This will allow my uprights to sit nice and flush and even on the base. You could also use a 1/4-inch grinding wheel for this task, but be careful because grinding wheels tend to gouge a lot more than flapper discs, and you don't want to remove too much metal. Buffing the welds off will also give it a really clean and professional finished look. The next step is to attach the main uprights that will eventually hold my middle and upper shelves. I went ahead and marked out 24 inches from the front end of my cart on both sides. I left enough space on the rear end of the cart to accommodate a bottle rack for my shielding gas cylinder. I'll go over that later. When doing this type of work, you always want to check and double check for level and square. So when attaching my uprights, I used my magnets to hold the 90-degree angle relatively close, ensured my edges were nice and flush, and my base was level before throwing a tack on there. One tack will hold the piece close while I tap it around and recheck with a square to make it perfect before applying another tack. Remember, always moving back and forth to opposite sides when tacking. We are only tacking at this point, so that if we need to make adjustments, we can. And I did the same thing on the other side. I was originally going to have my front uprights straight up and down, but that just seemed too boring. So I decided to angle them back a bit, and I'm really happy I did because it totally gave this cart some attitude and the aesthetics of it all just flow better. To accomplish this, I brought in my 7-year-old son to help out.
Ready? Now lean it this way just a little bit. Okay, like that. Hold it right there, okay?
I had him hold the piece and lean it back to the angle where I wanted it, and I used a level to make a mark to cut this piece at that exact angle. To transfer the same angle to the other side, I made my cut and placed it on top of the second upright, marked it out, and there you have it, same angle. For these angled uprights, I just placed them flush and even on the front end of the base and tacked all around. There will be some adjustments to be made later on to make them perfect. Now I'm going back and marking 36 inches up from the base and transferring my line over to my angled pieces using a 2-foot level. I left all my support pieces long when I tacked them on so I could make sure all my measures and cuts were in sync with each other, and to have room to fix any potential mistakes that might have come up. What you're seeing here is the early stages of my middle shelf. I made this following the same steps I did when I made the frame base. The dimensions of the shelf are 24 inches long by 12 inches wide, but you could choose any dimensions that work for you and put it together the same way. And to put my shelf on, I just selected a height that I liked, used some clamps to hold it all in place, double and triple check for level and square, and then I tacked it in place. The flat stock I mentioned earlier has now become supports for all of my shelves. I cut strips of flat stock 12 inches long for my top and bottom shelves and 10 inches long for my middle shelf. Then I spaced them out evenly and used a magnet to help me hold them in place while I welded them out. Notice how I put the shelf supports flush with the bottom of the square tubing? I did this so when I put my shelves in, there will be a small edge so tools and whatnot can't roll off. The next step is to cut my steel plates down to size and bang them into their new homes. Again, I'm using 16 gauge steel plate, just thick enough to do its intended job, but not too thick where it would have been overkill. Once they were in position, I stitch welded them in. Stitched just means that I put about a 1-inch bead every 4 or 5 inches or so, crisscrossing back and forth. Believe me, if you tried to weld the entire side of this plate, It would warp this thing so out of whack, the whole thing would have to be cut out.
That's good.
The rear end of my cart has become a storage rack for a shielding gas cylinder. Using square tubing for this really added even more to the uniqueness of this cart. Also, it leaves big enough gaps in between the tubing so nothing can get caught down there, such as slag, sparks, etc. Everything will just fall right out. I also added some gussets for extra support and a barrier just in case the cylinder wants to shift at all during transport. If you notice, I added a strip of flat bar to the very end and welded it onto the square tubing. The reason I did this is because the square tubing is only 1/16 of an inch thick and the flat bar is 3/16 of an inch thick. So thinking ahead and knowing I will be creating an axle for some rear wheels, I wanted to give it more beef to latch onto. And here's my rear axle, which I made out of a piece of rebar. I left it long and welded it right to my 3/16 inch thick flat stock. Then, I tacked a washer on each side, flush with my frame, so my 8-inch wheels don't wobble. Then, I cleaned it all up, slid my wheel on, and marked out where I need to make the cut. Next, I drilled a small hole in the very end. That hole will house a cotter pin, so the wheels are held securely in place. And finally, I slid my wheel back on, put another washer on the inside, inserted my cotter pin, and put the cap back on so you can't see any of it. For my front wheels, I used 3-inch swivel casters, and I could have welded them in, but I decided to use self-tapping screws instead because I figured if anything breaks, those would be the first to go. And now I will easily be able to replace them someday just by removing the screws.
Hey guys, so I just got done putting the final touches onto the cart and I'm very happy with it. I got some spots here to hang my leads and some extension cords and stuff. It's just 1-inch square tubing with some plate that I've cut into half circles. I got some chain in the back over here attached with these clips that I've welded on so I can replace the chain if need be, ever. And I've put a fire extinguisher down here to kind of give you guys some reference of the purpose of these chains. Typically, a shielding gas bottle is taller, so that's why there's 2 sets of chains. And then I added some flat stock, an extra piece here, just so I could hang grinders and clamps and whatever else. And the other side, guys, same thing with the little hooks. I've got an extension cord here. I've got my MIG gun here. If you've seen the pull-up bar video, if you haven't, I'll post it somewhere in here. The pipe nipples that I used to make the dip bar, I had to shorten them up a little bit, and here's the cut end of one. And I saved them, and it turns out that it makes a perfect holster for my MIG gun. So I'm really happy that I saved those. And I gotta say, this titanium 200 unlimited welder that I got from Harbor Freight has held up very, very excellent for this project. I'm using a Lincoln Electric .030 wire, flux cord wire. I know Harbor Freight gets a bad rap for their machines, but I'm really happy with this machine. It held up excellent. I'm looking forward to using that in the future. So here you have it, everyone. Complete DIY MIG welding cart. I had a ton of fun with this project, and I also have a ton more content coming out, all related to welding and metalworking. So if that's something that interests you, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos. Thanks, guys.